armed citizen. C'est-tu pas assez fatigant? Un hostie toxin. Is it not so freaking annoying, a stupid toxin? Uh, yeah, I'll have to stop it and put my face on. Donc, je vais l'arrêter. Mettre ma face. Donc, vous allez me voir la face. Bienvenue sur ma chaîne. Welcome to my channel. I'm going to mainly be speaking English today, so please bear with me while I speak French. Donc, ça va être principalement en anglais aujourd'hui, même si je vais faire une petite présentation en français, parce que ça fait très longtemps que je n'ai ni enregistré ni publié quoi que ce soit sur ma chaîne. Donc, très rapidement, nous sommes aujourd'hui le 21 août 2020. On est vendredi. La raison pourquoi que j'ai pas publié depuis si longtemps, c'est que j'ai déménagé. Et puis, dans le cadre de ce déménagement-là, j'ai choisi d'habiter dans un endroit où il n'y a pas de service Internet pour le moment de disponible. Et d'ailleurs, je n'ai ni Internet ni téléphone. Ça fait beaucoup, beaucoup de bien à l'âme de ne pas avoir Internet. Laissez-moi vous dire ça. Ça fait très longtemps que j'ai Internet et puis que maintenant je ne l'ai pas. Ça fait quelques mois. C'est la raison pour laquelle le canal a été principalement suspendu. Les vidéos sont toujours sur YouTube, mais par contre ont été rendues indisponibles parce que effectivement je suis pas en mesure de m'occuper de la chaîne. Donc voilà. Et aujourd'hui, je voudrais lire un texte d'un livre électronique que j'étais en train de lire. Et puis j'ai réfléchi très longuement au cours de ma lecture et je me suis dit que c'était impossible que je ne partage pas ces connaissances. Le livre est en anglais, c'est donc pourquoi aujourd'hui la diffusion sera en anglais principalement, puisque je vais lire le livre. Donc merci de votre patience si vous m'écoutez en anglais. So, back to English. So what I was saying mainly is welcome to my channel for a starter. We are today Friday the 21st of August 2020. You probably noticed that my YouTube channel, all or most of the video have been taken down. They're still on YouTube. They're just not available to the public. The reason being is that since early June I've moved, and the area I've choose to move in has no free internet connection for the moment. So basically I've been living without internet and no home phone, by the way. So that's very relaxing for the soul. I was on the internet for several decades, well, 2 decades actually, several. And it's very good not to have this service for a while. At least it was for me. I don't know if it's the same for everyone. So it gave me time to calm down in the interior inside, and to do other thing around the place where I now live. I will still not disclose it, but it's still British Columbia, still the Rockies. It doesn't matter really where I live. I'm in Canada. That's all you need to know. And I still have that strong French accent when I'm speaking in English. But I guess you're used to it by now if you've been following this channel for a while. So yeah, I've had time to read, and I came across, or I was given this ebook that I would like to share with you today. I was going through it, and I thought for a while. I stopped after chapter number 2, and I thought about it, and I said I cannot keep on reading without sharing what I'm currently reading. It's so obvious, it's so simple to understand, it's so what we need as people to use the consecrated expression that I've used several times in the past, to take it back from the crooks who pretend to be the government. If you've been in on this channel previously, by the way, I don't know when this will be published, so that's why I've stated the date of the recording. It may be a while, it may be never, who knows, but at least I'm going to do the recording as I'm reading, so you get the information that I have. But I was about to say that, yeah, by now we are sure and we know that Canada is not a country. Legally speaking, they have no ground to stand on, so no legal ground to stand on. They pretend to be the government when in fact they are a corporation. They need to go out, and sooner than later, and even when I say sooner, I think like 5 years back. We've had enough as people, because I'm a human, and I know people from coast to coast of this once was a country, Canada, turned into corporation. This is highly unacceptable. There was a coup d'état pulled mainly by traders in Quebec, but also with accomplices before, during, and after the fact in Canada. It doesn't matter if it's from British Columbia, Ontario, or Alberta. They're all into it. If I know about it, if I could figure it out, they certainly know about it. They got armies of lawyers protecting the ongoing coup d'état, but they're running out of pawns, and they're running out of time, and they're running out of space too. We, the people, of which I am, if you've been to this channel before, I've made a grand jury 5 years ago, and the first one in 100 years in Canada. It was an historical moment. This is when the people of Canada, honest people, sat down, made a judgment, and we came up with the conclusion that we've had enough of tyranny and despotism and decrees and all sorts of measure to prevent us to use our liberty, our freedoms, and also to steal the product of our labor day after day. The fraud is so big; it's an amount that just blows the mind. It cannot easily be described, but with one word, actually three words: everything is a fraud, or in other words, everything is a lie. Economic things is a lie, medicine, legal thing, all contract, all business, the government itself, all that you see or hear on mainstream media, most of what they call alternative media or social media, they're really big corporation behind it, so it's nothing social. It was created as a tool of spying, and I could go on and on. Program obsolescence, yeah, it's sickening. So really, this is why the Royal Public of Society of Canada was created. This is why the Act of Union was done in Falcon Lake. This is why those people who gathered there signed on the Constitution. This is why a king was put on the throne, a people's king. Because in the end, when you study the world's history, there are many forms of government that came around, from republic to dictatorship, despotism, all sorts of tyranny. That's all what they are. But there's one form that was kept in check by our ancestor who shed sweat, blood, tear to preserve and give us a chance never to go through that again. And having to spend our own streams and rivers and flooding of blood that they all did, and that is constitutional monarchy. You probably by now are fed up with constitutional monarchy, but that is only if you fail to realize that we've never had it properly. It was taken from us a long time ago, and they only pretended that it was such a form of government that we lived on in, when in fact it was corporatism. And I know I'm poorly pronouncing this word, but it's the same word in French, so these are the word that I'm having the most trouble to pronounce when they are the exact same in French, because I know how to pronounce them in French, and my mind just is having trouble to set them apart when they're the same word, same spelling. So the essay that I'm about to read today is utmost important because it resumes not my opinion, but the fact that were discovered not only through the grand jury, but as well by other people, and especially, and I'm using the word discovered, but it's I should use the word also set forward by our ancestors, uh, commonly in Canada, both by the French and the English, even if common law or law of the land mainly comes from Britain. It took them over 800 years to destroy it and for us to reach this point where we're at now. And this point in time, even though I don't have the internet, I still have friend who speaks to me about the news and what's going on. And honestly, I've seen that coming. It is now here. It is a full tyranny. They're using all sorts of measure to control the population, but it's all based on lie. So whatever reaction you have to a lie, that reaction is also a lie. And the lie goes back so far that for someone who would be sitting here and just listening to me would probably think that he has a nutcase in front of him, but the fact is I can prove and back everything that I'm saying with cold hard fact. My opinion has no stake. It doesn't matter at all what I think about the situation. My only concern is about everybody's freedom. If you don't have it, I can't claim I have any freedom. So we must take it back together, not just I alone, and pretend that I'm free when everybody around me is a slave. I've made many publications on my channel, except for some attack on my personal character, so on me directly for who I am. Nothing of what I've discovered, stated, said, or done in terms of public knowledge and public interest has been contested to this day. So if anyone dare to contest what I've done, what I've said, what I've discovered, please do. I'm well armed and I'm gonna smash you to pieces because it's not my opinion. Once again, it's not me who wants that. It is something that is called the truth, but the truth can be seen from many point of view, and that's my point of view that I'm bringing to you based on my experience. But once again, nobody contested it with solid argument. So it reflects the reading that I was doing. The text that I was reading. Sorry. So if someone, probably more intelligent and more knowledgeable than I am, wrote the text that I'm about to share with you on the date of 1853, and without knowing this text, I come into the same conclusion, and as well as other, it's probably because it's the truth from several point of view. So enough of me. I've told you what I wanted to tell you about the news right now. Maybe I could do just one more minute about that. I don't want to name things by their name when they're lies, but there's currently a supposedly pandemic going on, and it's not for me to comment because I've got no medical knowledge if that's supposedly virus is true or not. But what I can see with an external eye, because remember, if I lived in the middle of nowhere prior to moving, this was nothing compared to where I am now. The nearest village is something like 40 kilometers away, and there's no houses in between. So yeah, this is really the middle of nowhere. So I got, since the beginning of this supposedly crisis, I got to step back and I'm looking at it from a distance, and what I can say is that the cure is worse than the disease. And when such a thing happens, you gotta stop the cure, um, and let the disease do its job. So if it's true that there's a virus, I don't give a fuck if it's true or not. But I know one thing: the cure is worse than the disease. It's causing huge prejudice to everyone involved into that, and even those who don't want to be involved into it. Um, I see nothing of that, but apparently that's the latest rumor that came to me. They're now building concentration camp, and they're getting ready to forcibly use force to remove people from their houses and business and public sphere. So we've seen that before. We know where it leads, and we know, based on previous experience, that the medical corps was highly involved in what they used to call selection, and sending people to the left was slave labor, and sending people to the right was directly death. Or it was the other way around, but with the same result anyway. Both left and right ended up dying. Slave labor, or directly for in the combustion chamber, and to provide heat for the slave labor, I guess, and food in the soup. But I'm just assuming, so I wasn't there. Um, but I'm here now, and I see the same pattern repeating itself, and it's normal because it's going to be the same end result. But we have a chance, our last chance, to alter this course, prevent it from happening. And I don't want to use the word to be hero, because who cares about that? It's based on the cult of personality. But if we follow the same pattern, we're going to end up with the same result, because only the fools, and I'd prefer to amend this word to stupid fucking bastard idiots, use the same pattern and expect a different outcome. So let this text sink into you. It's already been too long, my introduction, so I'm gonna jump into it. Right before I do that, this very well end up being the longest recording I have done. It'll be impossible to do it in one shot. I can pause the recording and come back and continue, which I will certainly end up doing, because I'm gonna run out of coffee way before the end. This is so I'm gonna so please bear with me. I'm gonna ask for your patience. I'm gonna try, and that's not a victory. I'm gonna try to make as little comment as I can about this text. Read it as it is, but there are lots of Latin words in it, and historical reference. I don't read Latin, and even if I tried, it would probably sound worse than me trying to speak Chinese, which I don't speak anyway. So I don't speak Latin, so I will replace the Latin wording in the text by the word Latin, so I will not read it. You'll get to see the text, so if you do read Latin, you can pause this video and read it for yourself. And if you do read Latin, well, maybe you can teach me something. Let's get into it. It's not going to be easy for everyone to understand, but it's not real hard either. Common law, or law of the land, was made for the general people to understand what's going on. But the purpose of me reading that is to preserve freedom without bloodshed, and to avoid any type of tyranny, whether it be by government, which this book is mainly analyzing, but today also by corporation. They need to be put in check real fast. 5 years ago, and even 50 years ago, it should never have slipped to this point. As you know me on this channel, I'm not happy to having to do that. I don't gain anything, fame, glory, money. I don't care for all these things. I really honestly care about freedom, and once again, if I don't have it, if the neighbor doesn't have it, nobody has it, because you can't have freedom if it's not in your hand to take an excerpt from the famous Civil War song from Guns N' Roses. So here we go. I'm gonna shut the camera. If I do happen to have extended comments, I'll put back the camera. This is mainly audio. Unless you want to read the text, you don't really need to look at my face, so that's why I'm gonna shut the camera. And read you that text. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that you share. Well, not really. So let me just click on a few buttons, and let's do this. So yeah, you see a bit of the PDF. So here it is, an essay on the trial by jury, and I'm gonna turn off this so you don't. By Lysander Spooner, printed in Boston by the John P. Jewett Company in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1853. So yeah, the text is a photocopy, so some part may be harder to read. So I'm gonna do my best. Some words are not used very often in my own day-to-day life, so I may have trouble pronouncing them. So bear with me. You can probably get this book for yourself if you really want to read it. But for those who can't, so yeah, so it was published in the United States for purpose of the United States people in general, but it also very well apply in Canada because we have the same root from England and common law and law of the land. So those tiny sentences which are really related to the United States may just as well be transferred, like when they're stating the state, the list of state in the United States may be replaced by Canadian province, and it's gonna probably be the exact same thing. So entered according to Act of Congress in the year 1852 by Lysander Spooner in the clerk's office of the District Court of Massachusetts. So they know about that. And I'm going to read this. Notice to English publisher. The author claims the copyright of this book in England on common law principle without regard to Act of Parliament, and if the main principle of the book itself be true, that no legislation in conflict with the common law is of any validity, his claim is a legal one. He forbids anyone to reprint the book without his consent. So I'm not doing that. I'm just reading it. So this volume, it is presumed by the author, give what we will generally be considered satisfactory evidence, though not all the evidence, of what the common law trial by jury is. In a future volume, if it should be called for, it is designed to corroborate the ground taken in this, give a new concise view of the English Constitution, show the unconstitutional character of the existing government in England, and the unconstitutional mean by which the trial by jury has been broken down in practice, prove that neither in English nor the United States and Canada have legislature ever been invested by the people with any authority to impair the power, change the oath, or, with a few exceptions, abridge the jurisdiction of jury or select juror or any other than common law principle, and, consequently, that in both countries, so include Canada, legislation is still constitutionally subordinate to the discretion and consciences of common law jury, in all cases, both civil and criminal, in which juries sit. The same volume will probably also discuss several politic and legal questions which will naturally assume importance if the trial by jury should be re-established. Table of content. I'm not going to read that. Here we go. Let's start slowly. So slowly but surely, but right before we start into that, let me put back the camera briefly to remind you that first common law grand jury was done in 2015. I was part of it. I was not alone. When this channel gets properly reestablished, and it was there for the bulk of the last 5 years on my channel, all the grand jury procedure have been duly published on this channel. You can check it out. Our basis was the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter of Liberty, or Freedom, if you prefer. Our ancestor knew thing that we forgot, and it must be with a sense of emergency and intelligence re-established as fast as we can. But don't lose sight that this grand jury was legal, constitutional, lawful, and morally necessary. They ignored us, just like the common law principle says, by default. We win. It's just like in the art of war, when the army of the opponent doesn't show up to the battlefield, you can claim victory because you've won the battle, right? If you can take the high ground, it's yours. No fight is better than shedding blood. So this is where we are, people. Let's get into the text, and it will come all clear to you. I don't know if I'll read the entire book. That's 225 pages. And I don't intend to blow your mind with every little detail, but the first two chapters were so important, so clear, that I may stop there after the second chapter. And I urge you to get the book. It was published in a court, so it's probably available as a public document. So I urge you to get this. So yeah, and read it for yourself. Trial by Jury, Chapter 1. The Right of Juries to Judge of the Justice of Law. Section 1. For more than 600 years, that is, since the Magna Carta in 1215, there has been no clearer principle of English or American constitutional law than that in criminal case. It is not only the right and duty of jury to judge what are the fact, what is the law, and what was the moral intent of the accused, but that it is also their right and their primary and paramount duty to judge of the justice of the law, and to hold all law invalid that are, in their opinion, unjust or oppressive, and all person guiltless in violating or resisting the execution of such law. Unless such be the right and duty of juror, it is plain that instead of jury being a palladium of liberty, a barrier against the tyranny and oppression of the government, they are really mere tool in its hands for carrying into execution any injustice and oppression it may desire to have executed. But for their right to judge of the law and the justice of the law, juries would be no protection to an accused person, even as to matter of fact, for if the government can dictate to a jury any law whatever in a criminal case, it can certainly dictate to them the law of evidence. That is, it can dictate what evidence is admissible and what inadmissible, and also what force or weight it is to be given to the evidence admitted. And if the government can thus dictate to a jury the law of evidence, it can not only make it necessary for them to convict on a partial exhibition of the evidence rightfully pertaining to the case, but it can require them to convict on any evidence whatever it please to offer them. That the right and duty of juror must necessarily be such as are here claimed for them will be evident when it is considered what the trial by jury is and what is its object. The trial by jury, then, is a trial by the country, that is, by the people, as distinguished from a trial by the government. It was anciently called trial per peers. Hopefully I pronounced this right. That is trial by the country. And now, in every criminal trial, the jury are told that the accused has, for trial, put himself upon the country, which country you, the jury, are. The object of this trial by the country or by the people in preference to a trial by the government is to guard against every species of oppression by the government. In order to effect this end, it is indispensable that the people or the country judge of and determine their own liberty against the government, instead of the government's judging of and determining its own power over the people. How is it possible that jury can do anything to protect the liberty of the people against the government if they're not allowed to determine what those liberties are? Any government that is its own judge of and determine I'm gonna have fun with that one. Authoritatively, sorry for destroying this word. For the people, what are its own power over the people is an absolute government, of course. It has all the power that it chooses to exercise. There is no other, or at least no more accurate, definition of a despotism than this. On the other hand, any people that judge of and determine authoritatively for the government what are their own liberty against the government, of course retain all the liberty they wish to enjoy, and this is freedom. At least, it is freedom to them, because although it may be theoretically imperfect, it, nevertheless, corresponds to their highest notion of freedom. To secure this right of the people to judge of their own liberty against the government, the jurors are taken, or must be, to make them lawful juror from the body of the people by lot, or by some process that preclude any previous knowledge, choice, or selection of them on the part of the government. This is done to prevent the government constituting a jury of its own partisan or friend, in other words, to prevent the government's packing a jury with a view to maintain its own law and accomplish its own purpose. It is supposed that if 12 men be taken by lot from the mass of the people without the possibility of any previous knowledge, choice, or selection of them on the part of the government, the jury will be a fair epitome of the country at large, and not merely of the party or faction that sustained the measure of government. That substantially all class of opinion prevailing among the people will be represented in the jury, and especially that the opponent of the government, yes, if the government have any opponent, will be represented there as well as its friend, that the class who are oppressed by the law of the government, if any are thus oppressed, will have their representative in the jury, as well as those class who take side with the oppressor, that is, with the government. It is fairly presumable that such a tribunal will agree to no conviction except such as substantially the whole country would agree to if they were present, taking part in the trial. A trial by such a tribunal is, therefore, in effect, a trial by the country. In its result, it probably comes as near to a trial by the whole country as any trial that is practical to have without too great inconvenience and expense. And as unanimity is required for a conviction, it follows that no one can be convicted except for the violation of such law as substantially the whole country wish to have maintained. The government can enforce none of its law by punishing an offender through the verdict of jury, except such as substantially the whole people wish to have enforced. The government, therefore, consistently with the trial by jury, can exercise no power over the people, or, what is the same thing, over the accused person who represent the right of the people, except such as substantially the whole people of the country consent that it may exercise. In such a trial, therefore, the country, or the people, judge of and determine their own liberty against the government, instead of the government judging of and determining its own power over the people. But all this trial by the country would be no trial at all by the country, but only a trial by government, if the government could either declare who may and who may not be juror, or could dictate to the jury anything whatever, either of law or evidence, that is of the essence of the trial. If the If the government may decide who may and who may not be juror, it will, of course, select only its partisan and those friendly to its measure. It may not only prescribe who may and who may not be eligible to be drawn as juror, but it may also question each person drawn as juror as to his sentiment in regard to the particular law involved in each trial, before suffering him to be sworn on the panel and exclude him, and if he be found unfavorable to the maintenance of such a law. So, if the government may dictate to the jury what laws they are to enforce, it is no longer a trial by the country. And I'm not going to read the footnote. I'm going to scroll slowly through it. You can check them out if you wish. But a trial by the government, because the jury then try the accused not by any standard of their own, not by their own judgment of their rightful liberty, but by a standard dictated to them by the government. And the standard thus dictated by the government becomes the measure of the people's liberty. If the government dictate the standard of trial, it of course dictate the result of the trial. And such a trial is no trial by the country, but only a trial by government, by the government. And in it, the government determines what are its own power over the people, instead of the people determining what are their own liberty against the government. In short, if the jury have no right to judge of the justice of a law of the government, they plainly can do nothing to protect the people against the oppression of the government, for there are no oppression which the government may not authorize by law. The jury are also to judge whether the law are rightly expounded to them by the court. Unless they judge on this point, they do nothing to protect their liberty against the oppression that are capable of being practiced under cover of a corrupt exposition of the law. If the judiciary can authoritatively dictate to any jury any exposition of the law, they can dictate to them the law itself, and such law as they please, because law are in practice one thing or another according as they are expounded. The jury must also judge whether there really be any such law, be it good or bad, as the accused is charged with having transgressed. Unless they judge on this point, the people are liable to have their liberty taken from them by brute force without any law at all. The jury must also judge of the law of evidence. If the government can dictate to a jury the law of evidence, it can not only shut out any evidence it please tending to vindicate the accused, but it can require that any evidence whatever that it please to offer be held as conclusive proof of any offense whatever which the government choose to allege. It is manifest, therefore, that the jury must judge of and try the whole case, and every part and parcel of the case, free of any dictation or authority on the part of the government. They must judge of the existence of the law, of the true exposition of the law, of the justice of the law, and of the admissibility and weight of all the evidence offered. Otherwise, the government will have everything its own way. The jury will be mere puppet in the hand of the government, and the trial will be, in reality, a trial by the government and not a trial by the country. By such trial, the government will determine its own power over the people instead of the people's determining their own liberty against the government, and it will be an entire delusion to talk, as for centuries we have done, of trial by jury as a palladium of liberty, or as any protection to the people against the oppression and tyranny of the government. The question, then, between a trial by jury, as thus described, and the trial by government is simply a question between liberty and despotism. The authority to judge what are the powers of the government and what the liberty of the people must necessarily be vested in one or the other of the party themselves, the government or the people, because there is no third party to whom it can be entrusted. If the authority be vested in the government is absolute, and the people have no liberty except such as the government see fit to indulge them with. If, on the other hand, that authority be vested in the people, then the people have all liberty, as against the government, except such as substantially the whole people, through a jury, choose to disclaim. And the government can exercise no power except such as substantially the whole people, through a jury, consent that it may exercise. Section 2. The force and justice of the preceding argument cannot be evaded by saying that the government is chosen by the people, that, in theory, it represents the people, that it is designed to do the will of the people, that its members are all sworn to observe the fundamental or constitutional law instituted by the people, that its acts are therefore entitled to be considered the act of the people, and that to allow a jury representing the people to invalidate the act of government would therefore be arraying the people against themselves. There are two answers to such an argument. One answer is that in a representative government there is no absurdity or contradiction, nor any arraying of the people against themselves, in requiring that the status or enactment of the government shall pass the ordeal of any number of separate tribunals before it shall be determined that they are to have the force of law. Our American Constitution and Canadian have provided 5 of these separate tribunals, to wit, representative, Senate, executive, jury, and judge. We have all of this in Canada. And have made it necessary that each enactment shall pass the ordeal of all these separate tribunals before its authority can be established by the punishment of those who choose to transgress it. And there is no more absurdity or inconsistency in making a jury one of these several tribunals than there is in making the representative or the Senate or the executive or the judge one of them. There is no more absurdity in giving a jury a veto upon the law than there is in giving a veto to each of these other tribunals. The people are no more arrayed against themselves when a jury puts his veto upon a status which the other tribunal have sanctioned. Then they are when the same veto is exercised by the representative, the Senate, the executive, or the judge. But another answer to the argument that the people are arrayed against themselves when a jury holds an enactment of the government invalid is that the government and all the department of the government are merely the servant and agent of the people, not invested with arbitrary or absolute authority to bind the people, but required to submit all their enactment to the judgment of a tribunal more fairly representing the whole people before they carried them into execution by punishing any individual for transgressing them. If the government were not thus required to submit their enactment to the judgment of the country, therefore executing them upon individual, if, in other words, the people had reserved to themselves no veto upon the act of the government, instead of being a mere servant and agent of the people, would be an absolute despot over the people. It would have all the power in its own hand, because the power to punish carries all other power with it. A power that can, of itself, and by its own authority, punish disobedience, can compel obedience and submission, and is above all responsibility for the character of its law. In short, it is despotism. And it is of no consequences to inquire how a government came by this power to punish, whether by prescription, by inheritance, by usurpation, or by delegation from the people. If it have now but got it, the government is absolute. It is plain, therefore, that if the people have invested the government with power to make law that absolutely bind the people and to punish the people for transgressing those laws, the people have surrendered their liberty unreservedly into the hand of the government. It is of no avail to say, in answer to this view of the case, that in surrendering their liberty into the hand of the government, the people took an oath from the government that it would exercise its power within certain constitutional limit. For when did oath ever restrain a government that was otherwise unrestrained? Or when did the government fail to determine that all its acts were within the constitutional and authorized limits of its power, if it were permitted to determine that question for itself? Neither it is of any avail to say that if the government abuse its power and enact unjust and oppressive law, the government may be changed by the influence of discussion and the exercise of the right of suffrage. Discussion can do nothing to prevent the enactment or procure the repeal of unjust law, unless it be understood that the discussion is to be followed by resistance. Tyrants care nothing for discussion that are to end only in discussion. Discussion, which mean do not interfere with the enforcement of their law, are but idle wind to them. Suffrage is equally powerless and unreliable. It can be exercised only periodically, and the tyranny must at least be borne until the time for the suffrage come. Besides, when the suffrage is exercised, it gives no guarantee for the repeal of existing laws that are oppressive, and no security against the enactment of new ones that are equally so. The second body of legislature are liable and likely to be just as tyrannical as the first. If it be said that the second body may be chosen for their integrity, the answer is that the first were chosen for that very reason and yet proved tyrant. The second will be exposed to the same temptation as the first and will be just as likely to prove tyrannical. Who ever heard that succeeding legislature were, on the whole, more honest than those that preceded them? What is there in the nature of man or thing to make them so? If it be said that the first body were chosen for motive of injustice, that fact proves that there is a portion of society who desire to establish injustice, and if they were powerful or artful enough to procure the election of their instrument to compose the first legislature, they will be likely to be powerful or artful enough to procure the election of the same or similar instrument to compose the second. The right of suffrage, therefore, and even a change of legislature, guarantee no change of legislation, certainly no change for the better. Even if a change for the better actually it comes too late, because it comes only after more or less injustice have been irreparably done. But, at best, the right of suffrage can be exercised only periodically, and between the periods the legislature are wholly irresponsible. No despot was ever more entirely irresponsible than our Republican legislature during the period for which they are chosen. They can neither be removed from their office, nor called to account while in their office, nor punished after they leave their office, be their tyranny what it may. Moreover, the judicial and executive department of the government are equally irresponsible to the people, and are only responsible by impeachment and dependence for their salaries to these irresponsible legislature. This dependence of the judiciary and executive upon the legislature is a guarantee that they will always sanction and execute its law, whether just or unjust. Thus, the legislature hold the whole power of the government in their hand, and are at the same time utterly irresponsible for the manner in which they use it. If, now, this government, the three branches thus really united in one, can determine the validity of and enforce its own law, it is, for the time being, entirely absolute, and wholly irresponsible to the people. But this is not all. These legislature and this government, so irresponsible while in power, can perpetuate their power at pleasure if it can be determined what legislation is authoritative upon the people, and can enforce obedience to it, for they can not only declare their power perpetual, but they can enforce submission to all legislation that is necessary to secure its perpetuity. They can, for example, prohibit all discussion of the rightfulness of their authority, forbid the use of suffrage, prevent the election of any successor, disarm, plunder, imprison, and even kill all who refuse submission. If, therefore, the government, all departments united, be absolute for a day, that is, if it can, for a day, enforce obedience to its own law, it can, in that day, secure its power for all time, like the queen who wished to reign but for a day, but in that day caused the king, her husband, to be slain and usurp his throne. Nor will it avail to say that such act would be unconstitutional, and that unconstitutional act may be lawfully resisted. For everything a government please to do will, of course, be determined to be constitutional if the government itself be permitted to determine that the question of the constitutionality of its own act. Those who are capable of tyranny are capable of perjury to sustain it. The conclusion, therefore, is that any government that can for a day enforce its own law without appealing to the people, or a tribunal fairly representing the people for their consent, is, in theory, an absolute government irresponsible to the people, and can perpetuate its power at pleasure. The trial by jury is based upon recognition of this principle, and therefore forbids the government to execute any of its law by punishing violator in any case whatever, without first getting the consent of the country or the people through a jury. In this way, the people at all time hold their liberty in their own hand and never surrender them. even for a moment, into the end of government. The trial by jury, then, gives to any and every individual the liberty, at any time, to disregard or resist any law whatever of the government, if he be willing to submit to the decision of a jury the question whether the law be intrinsically just and obligatory, and whether his conduct in disregarding or resisting it were right in itself. And any law which does not, in such trial, obtain the unanimous sanction of 12 men taken at random from the people, and judging according to the standard of justice of their own mind, free from all dictation and authority of the government, may be transgressed and resisted with impunity by whomsoever pleases to transgress or resist it. The trial by jury authorizes all of this, or it is a sham and a hoax, utterly worthless for protecting the people against oppression. If it does not authorize an individual to resist the first and least act of injustice or tyranny on the part of the government, it does not authorize him to resist the last and greatest. If it does not authorize individual to nip tyranny in the bud, it does not authorize them to cut it down when its branches are filled with the ripe fruit of plunder and oppression. Those who deny the right of a jury to protect an individual in resisting an unjust law of the government deny him all legal defense whatsoever against oppression. The right of revolution, which tyrant in mockery accords to mankind, is no legal right under a government. It is only a natural right to overturn a government. The government itself never acknowledged this right, and the right is practically established only when and because the government no longer exists to call it in question. The right, therefore, can be exercised with impunity only when it is exercised victoriously. All unsuccessful attempts at revolution, however justifiable in themselves, are punished as treason if the government be permitted to judge of the treason. The government itself never admits the injustice of its law as a legal defense for those who have attempted a revolution and fail. The right of revolution, therefore, is a right of no practical value except for those who are stronger than the government. So long, therefore, as the oppression of a government are kept within such limit as simply not to exasperate against it a power greater than its own, the right of revolution can be appealed to and is therefore inapplicable to the case. This affords a wide field for tyranny, and if a jury cannot here intervene, the oppressed are unreadable, utterly defenseless, I think. It is manifest that the only security against the tyranny of the government lie in forcible resistance to the execution of the injustice, because the injustice will certainly be executed unless it is forcibly resisted. And if it be but suffered to be executed, it must be borne, for the government never make compensation for its own wrong. Since, then, this is forcible resistance to the injustice of the government, it is the only possible mean of preserving liberty. It is indispensable to all legal liberty that this resistance should be legalized. It is perfectly self-evident that where there is no legal right to resist the oppression of the government, there can be no legal liberty. And here it is almost all important to notice that, practically speaking, there can be no legal right to resist the oppression of the government unless there be some legal tribunal or other than government and wholly independent of and above the government to judge between the government and those who resist its oppression. In other words, to judge what law of the government are to be obeyed and what may be resisted and held for naught. The only tribunal known to our law for this purpose is a jury. if a jury have not the right to judge between the government and those who disobey its law and resist its oppression, the government is absolute and the people, legally speaking, are slave. Like many other slave, they may have sufficient courage and strength to keep their master somewhat in check, but they are nevertheless known to the law only as slave. That this right of resistance was recognized as a common law right when the ancient and general trial by jury was in force is not only proved by the nature of the trial itself, but is acknowledged by history. This right of resistance is recognized by the Constitution of the United States as a strictly legal and constitutional right. It is also recognized first by the provision that the trial of all crime except in case of impeachment shall be by jury, that is, by the country, and not by the government. Secondly, by the provision that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This constitutional security for the right to keep and bear arms implies the right to use them, as such as a constitutional security for the right to buy and keep food would have implied the right to eat it. The Constitution, therefore, takes it for granted that the people will judge of the conduct of the government, and as they have the right, they will also have the sense to use arm whenever the necessity of the case justify it, and it is a sufficient and legal defense for a person accused of using arm against the government if he can show to the satisfaction of a jury, or even any one of a jury, that the law he resisted was an unjust one. In the American state constitution, also, the right of resistance to the oppression of the government is recognized in various ways as a natural, legal, and constitutional right. In the first place, it is so recognized by provision establishing the trial by jury, thus requiring that the accused person shall be tried by the country instead of the government. In the second place, it is recognized by many of them as, for example, those of Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, by provision expressly declaring that the people shall have the right to bear arms. In many of them also as, for example, those of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Florida, Iowa, and Arkansas, by provision in their Bill of Rights declaring that men have a natural, inherent, and inalienable right of defending their lives and liberty. This, of course, means that they have a right to defend them against any injustice on the part of the government and not merely on the part of private individual, because the object of all Bill of Rights is to assert the right of individual and the people as against the government and not as against private person. It would be a manner of ridiculous supererogation, hopefully I pronounce this right, to assert in a constitution of government the natural right of men to defend their life and liberty against private trespasser. Many of these bills also assert the natural right of all men to protect their property, that is, to protect it against the government. It would be unnecessary and silly indeed to assert in a constitution of government the natural right of individual to protect their property against thieves and robbers. The Constitution of New Hampshire and Tennessee also declare that the doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. The legal effect of this constitutional recognition of the right of individual to defend their property, liberty, and life against the government is to legalize resistance to all injustice and oppression of every name and nature whatsoever on the part of the government. But for this right of resistance on the part of the people of all government would become tyrannical to a degree of which few people are aware. Constitutions are utterly worthless to restrain the tyranny of government unless it be understood that the people will, by force, compel the government to keep within the constitutional limits. Practically speaking, no government knows any limit to its power except the endurance of the people. But that the people are stronger than the government, and it will resist in extreme case, our government would be little or nothing else than organized system of plunder and oppression. All, or nearly all, the advantages there is in fixing any constitutional limit to the power of a government is simply to give notice to the government of the point at which it will meet with resistance. If the people are then as good as their word, they may keep the government within the bound they have set for it. Otherwise, it will disregard them, as is proven by example of all our American government, in which the Constitution have all become obsolete at the moment of their adoption for nearly or quite all purpose except the appointment of officer who at once become practically absolute except so far as they are restrained by the fear of the popular resistance. The bound set to the power of the government by trial by jury, as will hereafter be shown, are these, that the government shall never touch the property, person, or natural or civil right of an individual against his consent, except for the purpose of bringing them before a jury for trial, unless its pursuance and execution of a judgment or decree rendered by a jury in each individual case upon such evidence and such law as are satisfactory to their own understanding and consciences, irrespective of all legislation of the government. So in reality, what does this mean? It means that if you leave the power within the end of government, you get despotism in every case, and it doesn't matter what is written in the Constitution; they won't respect it, and they will lie to cover the fact that they're not respecting it. Voting, if it changed anything, would not exist and that's the reason why it exists. There's no election; there's a selection. So add an S to the word, and you're more accurate. When the juries, and those are my comments by the way, if you're just listening, put the camera back. When the jury have not only the duty to judge a case before them, but also the law that creates this action, you get freedom. It's not only a question of here's the law, here's the accused person or group or whatever entity. You get to judge the law first. If it's honest, it should go quickly. If it's a fraud, the people will probably not understand, invalidate the law, and thus invalidate the trial itself because that law is unjust. And this is exactly the reason why I'm making this comment. This is exactly what the grand jury in 2015 did. The accused party was not the government itself, it was the law. At the time, it was the law concerning work accident and professional sickness in Quebec, but it expanded because we needed to prove our case to evidently the master law of Canada, the Constitution, and whatever is written in the Constitution is of no importance itself. It's a guidebook, yes, so they're on notice of that, but natural right, whether they are written or not, are still the same. They are inalienable, and we must defend them with our blood if necessary. And as it is in the United States, written in the Constitution, the right to keep and bear arms. In Canada, let me tell you what, even if it's not written, it's still true. And at what point, and I know the answer, I'm going to let you appreciate that, but at what point does it becomes necessary to take arm against the government? When it first do anything tyrannical, anything we don't need. So before we do that, we can judge his law and invalidate them, plain and simple. Whatever they write in their legislation, a jury by trial, if it doesn't understand it, will invalidate it. And at each time that the jury does that, it'll prevent the usage of weapon. It simply will dismiss the case, and we're going to keep the peace that way. So that's exactly what the grand jury of 2015 did. In the end, they didn't invalidate the law. They ignored us, but it doesn't change anything. That law was declared invalid. The corporation which is in charge of turning this into execution was declared a criminal organization. They're still there because they've ignored us, because they're not used of people being sovereign and decide what's good for them, regardless of what they do. Well, we don't really have a jail on hand to put them in. We did the grand jury with the intention of proving to them that we're not slave. They have to listen. They did listen, by the way. But there's also a bunch of people that retired from their position. They did obey the grand jury in the end. When you read it in its totality, the decision that were made by the people were listened to. They changed several things. It's not so obvious to someone who doesn't know the entire case, and it's been done in a way that they're covering their trace. They never acknowledge that it was because of the grand jury and all of its procedure before, during, and after, because there's more than just the term grand jury to it. It took us several years, several people, hundreds of manpower hours to achieve that, and we never done it for fame or not even to be acknowledged. So it was never really published elsewhere than on my channel. I'm pretty much the only one, with a few exceptions, who still advocate the 2015 grand jury and its historical importance. So it was done in French. I understand that most people who are going to listen to this broadcast up to this point, that you will not be able to go through the grand jury and really listen to the procedure, because it's technically useless. All you need to know is the judgment that came out of it. It won. It was obtained by default, but we still held the procedure. There was no need to do that, because the default in common law is all there is a need to be. And I'm talking about that because we subsequently, after the grand jury, about a year and a half, I don't have the exact date and it doesn't really matter, I think it was in 2017, 2018, we went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and within 30 days we obtained a default judgment. So even in front of their court, they ran away before us. About 45 days after the default judgment, the Supreme Court of Canada, which is no Supreme Court of anything, they're a criminal organization, they did answer, we're not going to hear this cause. Well, in common law, you're in default, so it doesn't matter what you say 45 days later. Where were you for all this time? So we won. It really is valid, this judgment, no matter what the Supreme Court will say, whatever you'll read in their record. Oh, we didn't hear that case, therefore there's no case. Fuck you. The case was real, and it won by default. You weren't there. Just like I said at the beginning, if I'm walking with my army and we take the upper ground, and you are not there to stop us, you fucking lost the battle. We have the upper ground, and we're gonna keep it. Now you come to us, see how you're gonna get it from us. You're going to meet with resistance, and that's exactly what's happening. That's exactly why each time I make a broadcast, there's a toxin. If you don't know the toxin, what its signification is and why it rings really that way in that tone, if you know anything about sound, that toxin is on a tone that will resonate for the longest distance without any amplifier whatsoever. It is the bell of emergency. It is the bell to call people to react. Now, when you hear this bell, you don't stand still and say, "What the fuck's happening?" You know something is happening. Get ready because it's gonna strike on you. Whatever it be. It may be an invading army, but it can also be a forest fire. I mean, it doesn't need to be an entire catastrophic event, I wanted to say. But you know you need to do something when you hear the tocsin. So in our case, when I called to arm, since I'm non-violent and I don't advocate that we fire on each other with weapons, beside the weapons are produced by the guilty party anyway, so that would only enrich them. Our weapons are plain and simple. First, what you can say with your mouth, but secondly, if you can see the camera, these are the weapon I'm calling for, and I've always called for. And that's exactly what this book is doing for you. Before you actually take your weapons to the government, you take them to a trial. And that's exactly what the 2015 grand jury did. It invalidated every act of the so-called government, really a private corporation, whether it be for Canada, Quebec, or any other province. They're all the same. They're all in the same boat, and they're guilty by association and after the fact, if it not during and before, for despotism reason. Don't ever think that Canada is a palladium of liberty. It's not. It's a fucking dictatorship, and we gotta get rid of it. Or else you're gonna get a hole in the head through a bullet, and a hole in the ground, and you may not even be alone in that hole, because they're gonna put you in mass grave as they did before. Because remember, I told you at the beginning, we've seen this before. So before I get to chapter 2, you will not notice on the recording, but I'll pause it, go get some more coffee and some food, and I'll return right after. So to get back to the grand jury briefly, it was based on a document that was written on the 15th of June 1215, so 800 years exactly when we started with the grand jury. That's why we did the public draw exactly on that date, and other procedure during the 800 year of possibly, probably, most likely the most important document ever written by man. But once again, it doesn't matter at all that it was written or not. It still is true. The government is a creature of the humans to govern, is the right word, current affair. But in any case or every case, it does not supersede the human itself. It's a creature of ours. It cannot emancipate from us, just the way Quebec cannot emancipate from Canada. It's a division of Canada. It's not the other way around. It's not an area of independent state that came up together as the United States. In this, we differ. It's very different type of thing. In the United States, every state is independent, and they came in a union. That's not the way Canada was technically done. It's a country as a whole, and once an area has been tied onto it, it cannot emancipate. It's a creature of it. And it happens that there were ungoverned territory, now known as Alberta, Saskatchewan, and whatnot. It doesn't matter, Manitoba, even Quebec, northern Quebec. And it was grabbed by our ancestors and add onto it as a whole. If you take a part out of a whole, you don't have a whole anymore. So when the grand jury of 2015 came about, a great part of it was based on the Magna Carta. So it could not be contested by the legal, or they like to call themselves legal, but the legal group. They're not legal, they're absolutely legal criminals, but they call themselves that way because everything's a fraud and everything is a lie, and we must put an end to it. So I did take a short break. You probably didn't notice it. I'm gonna jump into chapter 2 in a moment, but it's all and mainly about the Magna Carta, where it came from and why. But in any case, you may say, oh, it's an 800-year-old paper. Well, it was written in Latin to begin with, but it still is in full effect today. Some of the chapter of it are spent, cannot be technically reinstated today, but the bulk of it technically is only one article and is the trial by jury, or in other words, the right of the people, the inalienable right. It's a freedom, by the way. It's not even a right. The freedom of the people to keep their government in check, whatever the form of the government. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's part of the Canadian Constitution, and even if it was not part of the Canadian Constitution, it's still true. The people not only have the right, the liberty, but also the duty to keep their government in check. It has to be done. There's no other question. And if you choose not to do it, well, that's because you're a slave, and that's all there is to it. My last broadcast for Freedom for Free for All before I shut my YouTube channel was called Freedom or Slavery, Your Choice, really, because that's the only one that really matters in the end. You don't choose to breed or not to breed. This is done automatically. Same thing for food. You need to eat. So it's not a choice, but freedom is a choice, or slavery is a choice in this case. It is a bad one, but still is a choice. Once again, like I said at the beginning of this recording and broadcast, I cannot claim to be free when all the neighbors are slaves. It would only be a lie to myself. And right now, I don't claim myself to be free. I don't think that I've enjoyed any freedom in my life. I, in fact, don't think that Canada is any type of land of free people. I've always considered that it was a land of stupid slave. And even those who call themselves awakened, you're not fucking awaking. You're sleeping. Because if you were not sleeping, we would not be in the shit that we are now. And I would not be doing this recording. So the mere fact that I'm having to read that in front of you and that recording exists, even if it's digital, it still exists, is a proof on its own that we are not free. And I don't give a fuck if you don't believe me. It still is true. And it's not because of my opinion. You just have to look outside how people are freaking slave, idiot wearing masks and keeping 2 meter distance, and soon they're gonna end up in a concentration camp, and the doctor will decide if they require a bullet or if they'll be exhausted to death. So Magna Carta, Chapter 2. I'm gonna shut the camera and back to the recording.